Welcome to the StreetSmart Wisdom podcast from WisdomFeed. I'm Steve Stein. In this series, we talk to best-selling authors and thought leaders doing great work in the world of mindfulness, wellness, and creativity. Our mission is to bring ancient ideas down to street level and bring you takeaways that you can apply to everyday life. Enjoy. This podcast is sponsored by BetterListen.com. At BetterListen, we have hundreds of audios, courses, and programs available to stream and download. As a listener to the StreetSmart Wisdom podcast, you are eligible for a free audiobook download. Just visit BetterListen.com/free today. Today's show features Thomas Moore, the best-selling author of Care of the Soul. Thomas is an old friend, and it was truly an honor to speak with him. In this show, I discovered that my iPhone does indeed have a soul. We spoke about literature, writing, how Thomas got started in his career, and the importance of soul in our modern world. A very interesting discussion. Enjoy the show. Welcome. We're here today with our friend Thomas Moore, author of many books, most notably Care of the Soul. And here's an opportunity for our listeners to find out a little bit more about this. I think he's an iconic thinker. And so welcome, Thomas Moore, and tell us who you are, Thomas.
Well, I can start with my name. Thomas Moore, it's my name. I actually have had people ask me if it's a stage name because it's a name of some famous people. I've always thought about Thomas More, the Englishman who was a saint in the Catholic tradition. And he lost his head because he wouldn't turn religion over to the king, or turn his life over to the king. I think that's very relevant to me even today. And it's an Irish name, so I have a very close relationship with Ireland. I first traveled to Ireland when I was 19 and spent 2 years in Northern Ireland studying. And then since then I've gone back countless times. I couldn't tell how many times I've gone back to Ireland. I've lived there again at different times. My children went to school in Ireland. So that's an important part of my life. And I feel like half of my loyalty, or half of my being is in Ireland, and I have many friends and relatives there. And another aspect to me is that my dad was a plumber, and I come from a family of plumbers. I don't come from a family of university people and intellectuals. I come from plumbers. And my wife always says that I'm dedicated to exploring these vast ideas of the culture and try to translate them for plumbers who can really enjoy them. And so that is a big part of my life. It's part of my character, who I am. And so I've written a lot of books. That side of me is there too. I love to write. I just love to write. I have a passion for writing. Every day I have to write. And I'm always writing several books at once. Right now, today, I have 3 books just about ready to give to my agent. I have a book, Therapy, that I finished, totally finished, ready to go. I have a book called The 9 Laws of Life that I've been writing for a while, and that needs a little bit more work, about 1 more week, and then I'll have that finished. And I've written a detective story. I like reading detective stories. I've written a few. I never published them, but I have one now that at least I'm going to give it a crack and see if someone might like to read it.
For what detective stories do you enjoy, or have you enjoyed over the years? I'm just curious.
Well, I like the kind of literate ones, the ones that have some literate quality to them. I'm not interested in the really blood and guts ones. I don't go for those too much. police procedurals I read, but I'm not too happy with those. I like what they call cozies. And the people who read detective stories understand that word. It means a detective story where there's not too much blood and where the characters are interesting and like there are some television shows that are cozies, like Midsummer Murders or Agatha Christie stories are cozies. I think maybe you might even say Sherlock Holmes are cozies. So they're interesting stories, and that's what I like. And I write that kind of a story.
I'm a little jealous. You do so much writing, but I hope to do more writing. And I think that's phenomenal that you could have 3 kind of books going on parallel, and we're promoting a 4th book in the previous conversation that you did a year or so ago. But why did you start to write? And why do you feel that compelled to to put ideas down on paper?
My philosophy is that I don't choose anything. I don't choose what to do. I don't choose the shape of my life. I have to make some choices, but fate or life itself has designed my life. I would never have created a life like I have had. It doesn't make any sense. If you had asked me when I was 20 years old, would I write a bunch of books, 30 books on the soul, I'd laugh because it wouldn't make any sense to me. So I've had my life changed by circumstances, or by making certain choices over time, and because of that, as time has gone on and these choices have multiplied, I hardly recognize myself. I mean, I've done what I think life wants of me, but that's what I keep trying to do. But I don't choose all of this. And so, but my education has really prepared me for it. So that's another instance of where life has prepared me, but I never would have been able to do it myself. So I went to a Catholic seminary when I was a young man, when I was 13. It was a monastic community. So I lived as kind of a monk. They don't use the word monk exactly, but it's a very technical distinction.
How did that happen? What made you make that decision? Or did you just make a left turn and you were there, or were you compelled to do it?
When I was a kid, I went to a Catholic school and there were nuns all around, and I was at a church where there were Catholic priests.
Where did you grow up? I think I missed that.
Detroit.
Oh.
A lot of people come from Detroit. And so it was a great place for me to grow up, and I loved it. And but when I saw the life of these priests, I thought, I really liked what they were doing, and I liked them, and I thought I think I'd like to try that. But it meant leaving home when I was 13 years old. That was not easy. And it would take 12 to 13 years to go through the process of becoming a priest, go through all the education. I did that. So I learned Latin and Greek when I was starting out learning Latin and Greek in high school, and then further into college. And my courses in philosophy and theology were taught in Latin, a lot of them, most of them, taught in Latin. I had to answer questions and exam questions in Latin. It was that kind of a thing. Nobody today would go through that.
My 15-year-old, for not really by choice, by kind of accident, he's taking Latin now in high school.
Excellent. That's great.
Why is that great? Because I know I'm a big fan of etymology and the history of words.
Yeah.
Why is it? Because when we stop talking, I'm going to go tell him why it's good.
Well, I think it does a lot of things. First of all, it does help with the language. I'm able to use words and really know their depth with both Latin and Greek, because our English is dependent largely on both Latin and Greek. So that really helps me a great deal. I can use etymologies, and besides that, I know when I use a word, I know its deeper meaning. So often I have trouble because people don't hear the same word that I use because I'm thinking of the more original meaning of the word. Like psychotherapy, the word in Greek means soul, psyche, soul, therapy, care. So care of the soul is what the word psychotherapy means. Now, most people don't think of the word psychotherapy that way. So I have problems because I tell people I do psychotherapy, but when I say that, I could get in trouble because I don't have the same education that most therapists have today. So anyway, that's one thing. The other thing about Latin and Greek, or Latin, if you want to talk about your son, Latin also gives you exposure to another culture, one of these early cultures. So, and most of the time you read Latin, you learn a lot of interesting things. You learn about logic, and you learn to think in quite a deep way, because the Latin texts we study have a lot of depth to them. So that's another thing about it. Also, it just cultures you to learn languages. The more languages you know, I think the deeper your culture is as a person. So there are many, many reasons to study Latin. I think it's a wonderful idea, and it'll be useful the rest of your life, no matter what you do.
Excellent. Oh, good to know. So another thing you spoke about was my father was an electrician and owned a record store, but mostly trades. Your father or your family was plumbers, you said?
Yes. Yes.
So, the whole thesis or idea for this whole StreetSmart Wisdom podcast or video series, however you're hearing this now, is to how do you take these esoteric or Latin sounding or foreign sounding concepts, and what does it have to do with a plumber or an electrician or someone on Wall Street? Because that, I think, is I think there's 2 points that need to kind of be connected, and it's almost like if they could be translated from Latin or from foreign sounding ideas to street smart, street level conversation, there's value in there. So what does your 30 books have to do with real life?
Well, that's a good question. I want to be clear about this, because I am not a popularizer. I don't see myself that way at all. I'm too much of an egghead to be able to do that. I have too much interest in study and all these languages and these books around me. I've read all these books, they're not just there. So I don't want to just popularize what I do. On the other hand, I don't want to just write for other writers and other with professors and people like that. It turns out that when I try to have sort of a middle place there, middle ground, like you might say a Buddhist approach, the middle way, and that way I don't satisfy the professors and I don't satisfy the man on the street, the person on the street. So that's a problem. I don't popularize. I understand what that means. I see people doing it, but I don't do that. But I do try to present my ideas in ordinary language. I try to avoid jargon as much as I can. I try, here's the thing. I see myself as a writer. I don't know if anyone else does, but I do. I don't hear that from people very often. They don't treat me as a writer. I'm never invited to writers' conferences or things like that. It's very rare for me to do that. I wish I would, because I see myself as a writer, but nobody sees me. They see me as a self-help person, I think, which, is not very kind to me. I don't like that box at all. I see myself more like Emerson, Waldo Emerson and Thoreau, who wrote a kind of practical philosophy. So I would, if you read my books, they're a bit demanding for the average person. You'd have to work at them a little bit. On the other hand, 3 million books of Care of the 3 million copies almost of Care of the Soul that sold. So that's a lot for that kind of book, a lot of people are reading it. And that just is kind of scratching the surface, because people are giving them away to each other all the time. So a lot of people have read these books. So they must be intelligible.
Why do you think Care of the Soul struck a chord? Is it just the name? I mean, that when I read it, I found it not easy to read, but relevant, um, and there were certain things that I vaguely remember, and it comes to, again, we're trying to see, well, how can you care for your soul as you go through day-to-day life? And when there was some saying above the doorway when someone walked in, um, or what are certain things to inject soul into your everyday life or into your experience or quality of life, you know?
Well, the first part is to realize that you have a soul. You're not a machine. Today, and this was true when I wrote the book, but it's even worse today. Today, all fields, including psychology and even religion in many ways, treat us human beings as if we were totally material. And so today the whole thing is about the brain, what part of the brain lights up when you love or when you hate or something like that. That's so materialistic. It's exactly contrary to what I wrote in Care of the Soul. And yet it is the way we think today in everything. In psychology and medicine, evidence-based medicine means a doctor doesn't treat the person as a person at all. The doctor has to look up and see how this particular symptom has been treated successfully and use that method. I think it's dehumanizing. The whole thing is dehumanizing. So Care of the Soul really basically means let's not buy into this way the culture is going. And as I said, it's worse today than it was 25 years ago when I wrote Care of the Soul. And I feel quite frustrated because I would like to just blast this idea out. And I hate listening to the news or to listen to what people are hearing in the media, because it's all about behavior, and medicine is so only physical, and people are treated as objects. All of that just gets to me, So I hope that when people saw Care of the Soul, that it wasn't just the title, but that was something. It's a very ancient phrase. I think it has some zip to it. And then what I hear from most people is that they bought the book and let it sit on their shelf for a few years, then they read it when it was time. That's what they always tell me. They read it when it was time to read it. And they did read it, and they got some ideas about how not to live in this culture that is.
And again, now, I have 15-year-old and 13-year-old. So I'm not sure if I caught this right, but now we do a lot of work in the mindfulness world, and we try to, even with mindfulness, well, how do you bring that to street level? What is it, if you're a monk or if you're already Archetypal or Omega, that's great. You already kind of get the concept, but what does it have to do with the rest of the world? And so I think you're speaking to that, but what do they talk about where there's biofeedback or there's neurofeedback, where they can watch the brain and see if you're actually meditating? So, but it sounds like, I find that fascinating because there's real world proof, but is there such a thing as soul biofeedback? Or
yes, there is. I mean, you have to understand, I detest that thing.
No, I know, but I find it interesting.
No place in my life.
No, but that's why I bring it up, because it's a distinction.
And especially use the word proof. That just really riles me, because we've had centuries of deep thinkers and artists who have explored the human situation that we're in with such depth and insight. And they don't need to be proven by science. See, that's the thing. If we could just read a good novel or read one of the great plays of the early Greeks, there's so much to get from that about what it means to live as a human being. And today, people want to go out and find out how you can prove that in a laboratory with wires to wire somebody up. I think oh boy, I can't think of a word bad enough for that, because it takes the soul out of what we're doing. And you don't have to prove anything. You have to just explore with you are a human being with a mind and imagination. to explore these things. You don't need proof.
That's I guess what I'm trying to get out of. Because often, like my non-believer friends, or not so often necessarily, but or from at a dinner table, and conversation, not people from Omega or the Open Center or Kripalu, just the normal middle of the road people, very nice people in our community. And you say the word now, meditation or mindfulness, now it's a buzzword, of course. Everyone still kind of glosses over, but when you have a science, there's all this science that backs it up. Now I know you're cringing, so
I am.
Still mention it because I think it's relevant. So when you could say that they've done scientific studies that you have telomeres, which is the strand of your DNA, that they found that people that live to 100 years old plus, they have longer strands of telomeres, and they've done science that people who have done mindful meditation, their strands get longer. They're like, no way. They're now all of a sudden, they're out of their day-to-day paycheck, mortgage, vacation, and they're like, wow, the mind does connect the body. So when those people have read the books at the right time, what have they said that made it worthwhile, in the soul, that affected their day-to-day life or care of the soul?
Well, I have to say, I get letters and emails from people every day about this. Just today, I've had, I think, 3 already today from people, and these people were from all parts of the world, I don't think any of them were Americans. And they are telling me that they get this, they get this idea, and it's been growing in them for a long time anyway, and that I was able to give them a language and spell out further what they were looking for, that they could feel the fact that the world around them is making them feel more like a machine, and that they're losing hope, and they've lost their traditional religious ideas as well. I got that this morning in emails. People saying, I used to be religious, but I can't be anymore, and help me, help me, because I don't want to just be secularist. I want to be something, but I can't do what I used to do. That's a theme I love. I mean, that's something I've written several books about. I love it. I want to write more books about that. There are ways of being religious and spiritual where you don't have to stick with the traditional established religions. You can draw from them and learn tremendously from them, but you don't have to be a member in order to go ahead and live your spiritual life in your own way with your own talent and your ideas. So that's part of the soul too. Soul, traditionally the word soul includes a spiritual life. And so I do both. I try to be spiritual and just have this depth of soul at the same time, link them together in everything I do. This is, by the way, where Hillman and I differ. A lot of people think I just write about what Hillman said. Hillman was terrific. I think he's the most brilliant person ever to have lived, actually. I'll go that far. But he didn't get it right on the spiritual thing. Exactly. He did write some very wonderful things about it, but he had an antagonism about religion and about the spiritual life. He didn't like it. He always we were very close friends, but he didn't like the monk in me. He said, he always had the trouble with that. So what I've tried to do, though, is to bring the spiritual and the spirit and soul together in all my work. And I keep my spirituality intact, although I don't belong to any tradition at all. I think anybody, when you get to a certain point, you kind of let them go. They've been your training wheels, and you develop your own spirituality, and you can do that. And I think it's much richer and it's more responsible.
Okay, so that's all. I want to enjoy watching this again because there was some interesting points. And I think one thing that I'm personally interested in, especially now. So here technology is, changing at a rate that we're able to do this. And to record something, you're in New Hampshire, I'm in New Jersey. Wonderful. And even just a few years ago, this technology would be very costly and still might not work. And hopefully this is working. It's still not 100%, but the evolution at such a pace, especially with kids, my wife spends some time on Facebook, maybe too much time, but she found this clip that I thought was amazing. They had some like 12, 13, 14-year-olds. They put them in a room with an old dial-up phone. And they said, okay, make a call. And there was a half hour, they couldn't figure it out. They tried dialing without picking up, and then they tried picking up without, it was funny. But with all the video games and with all the things going on now, what does soul have to do with, everything is so damn digital, and there's positive aspects of it. But I think it's almost one step further removed from, does the iPhone have a soul? Is it a net plus or a net positive?
I think it definitely has a soul. And it depends how you use it in a way. Like, I think our use today of technology right now is this very soulful thing, because we're having a conversation. One of the most important things to the soul is a good conversation. There's nothing more important. Now, you can have it while you're shopping at the supermarket with somebody, or you can go and meet someone for a picnic or go to lunch. You can have it there. But in some ways, this conversation we're having is even more soulful, because we can see each other and we can talk about some things that are really important, and we include other people. Like see, I see you as a psychotherapist. I see that your work is psychotherapy in an extended sense, not professional, but real. And so what you're doing is, and you've done your whole life. I've known you a long time. You've been doing this work, and you are encouraging conversations of substance, and you're making them happen in a way that's attractive to people. So I see your work as psychotherapy, which means care of the soul. And it's soulful to have a good conversation. Whether you have it on a screen or at a restaurant, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference.
That's pretty clear. So it's kind of neutral. Yeah, there's a lot more I can go on for a while, but I think... Our friends at BetterListen are offering a special discount to listeners of the show. 20% off all programs by Thomas More. Just go to BetterListen.com, search for Thomas More, and use discount code SOUL20 when checking out. Enjoy. We've covered a lot of bases. Any last thought? I have this question that I throw at people. And so if you were a superhero, what would your origin story be? Was there something that happened or some event that all of a sudden you changed things, or any origin story or overarching kind of story that comes to mind?
Well, I know mythology pretty well. And one of the things that we study, those of us who work in mythology, are origin stories of cultures and of people and heroes. And there are certain things I would expect, like I would expect that somehow my origin, if I were going to be a hero, would have to be involved with animals in some way. So very often at the birth of a hero, you have animals. Now, in the case of Jesus, you have these animals that are very important to the story. They don't appear in the New Testament Gospels the way they do in our traditions, but they're still very, very important to have the animal there. And you look at some other myths of the birth of the hero, there are animals involved, or they have an animal nature. There's something about us being animals, that we have an animal totem, some animal that's close to us. And we're animals in general. So that's part of it. Another is that the hero usually has many parents, not just the original parents, not just the physical parents. So in some cases, the hero might be left and abandoned, so these other people come along and pick up and become the parents. Lots and lots of stories about that. And it's not about literal abandonment. It's about the fact that a hero should have a parent too, that's something that parents him or her, that is maybe otherworldly or different from just physical parents. So I would have to talk about some other parents that I have. Some, as much as I love and tremendously respect my own parents, we're always finding new parents in life. I've had so many fathers in my life. It's amazing how many fathers have come along. Few mothers, but not as many as fathers. Maybe that's because I'm a man. That's just a natural thing. But at any rate, I think that the story would involve those factors. And it would take me some time to write up a story. I do it, but those are some of the elements I'd want.
No, that's fascinating. Okay, so anything else before we wrap up this segment?
If I'm going to introduce myself in a way, I can't do it without mentioning my family. I have a wife who is a painter and a yoga teacher, and she trains yoga teachers. And she's a senior, in other words, a very senior kind of a yoga person. And she connects her art and yoga together. She has people do yoga and then paint. And she has her own painting practice as well. And she's a wonderful painter. She's taught me a lot about the visual arts. My daughter is 26 now, and I homeschooled her. I have a background in music. I studied music up through graduate school, composition. And I taught her music theory. And that helps her now, but she's a singer and plays many, many instruments. And right now she's in South America performing, and she's traveling all over the world with her music, which is somewhat spiritual and somewhat popular. Wonderful, very bright and talented person. And my stepson is, Abe is an architect who is trying to build buildings that are sensitive to the communities in which they're built, so that they don't just plop down a building in a community and let them, deal with it. They actually work with the community to see what kind of building that community needs. So I have a very rich and wonderful family, and so my identity isn't complete unless I talk about them.
I like that. And what's your website if people want to find out more?
My website is thomasmoresoul.com. That's S-O-U-L, Thomas More Soul, all one word, .com.
Okay, excellent. All right, Thomas, that was a pleasure. Thanks so much for your time, and I'll speak to you soon.
Thank you, Steve.
You've been listening to StreetSmart Wisdom, the podcast from WisdomFeed. You can follow WisdomFeed on Facebook, Twitter, and iTunes. If you haven't, please subscribe, rate, and review our podcast on iTunes. We appreciate your feedback. Join us next week for another Street Smart conversation. Thank you for listening.